Thanks so much to the organizers of this wonderful meeting for inviting me to my first HowCon. I want to share with you something that I've been working on for the past 2.5 years that I hope you will find as exciting as I do. And that is the Whale Sanctuary Project. And the Whale Sanctuary Project is a project that I founded a couple of years ago now. And we have over 50 members of our team, marine mammal experts, veterinary experts, animal behavior experts, engineers, etc., from around the globe. Everyone we've asked who is at all interested in animals and in the plight of captive dolphins and whales in the entertainment industry has said, yes, I've been waiting for this project. So come along with me as I sort of describe for you why this is such a necessary next step or the next wave in our relationship with marine mammals. So just a little bit of placement of marine mammals. When we're talking about marine mammals, we're in this case talking about cetaceans. They are a modern order of mammals that includes about 90 species. It depends upon whether you talk to somebody, a scientist who's a lumper or a splitter. Some say there's 75 species, some say there's 80, some say there's 90. There's a lot of them. And these are species of dolphins, whales, and porpoises. And there are two suborders within that order. One, the odontocetes, who are the toothed whales, dolphins, and porpoises, and the mysticetes, the baleen whales. And for this talk, I'm going to focus on the odontocetes. So, when we think of dolphins and whales, we generally think of this. Photos of leaping dolphins, beluga whales hanging out with each other, orcas traveling together, and just doing what they do and enjoying their life. But for many, many members of these species, the reality is more like this. Dolphins and whales are kept in tiny concrete tanks for the purposes of education. When there's no education, for the purposes of entertainment, and for other such purposes, for instance, dolphin-assisted therapy, which is a complete sham, and they have to endure lives that look like this. Well, for a long time, those of us in the marine mammal scientific community and advocacy community knew that something was not right. These animals cannot thrive in concrete tanks. But people were still interested in seeing them performing tricks. And there were a couple of films that came out that brought attention to that. One was The Cove by Louis Ahoyas. But then later, the one that really did bring all of this to the public's attention is Blackfish. How many of you have seen it? Great. Okay. Well, Blackfish, you know, is about Tillicum, the orca, who lived at SeaWorld, Orlando, who killed his trainer, Don Branchow. And because that happened, people started to take a look at what these animals endure in the concrete tanks. And in 2013, Blackfish came out and it busted the door wide open. And now everybody knows about how SeaWorld and these other entertainment parks treat orcas and the other animals that they keep as well. And because of that, SeaWorld
revenues are going down, and ticket sales are going down. We have a long way to go, but we hope that this will apply pressure to SeaWorld and these other places to find another way to relate to these animals rather than as circus performers. So here's cetacean captivity by the numbers, just to give you an idea of the scope. There are around 3,000 whales, dolphins, and porpoises, representing about 10 species and hybrids held in captivity around the world. And I say hybrids because most of these places, including SeaWorld, really don't respect the genetics of these animals. They breed indiscriminately. In North America, there are 481 bottlenose dolphins held in tanks or small pens, 80 belugas, and 25 orcas and other species. As for orcas, there are currently 60 held in captivity in at least 14 marine parks in 8 countries. And I say that, but the fact is that right now the hotbed of orca and beluga captivity is in Asia. China and Russia have and continue to traffic belugas and orcas from wild populations into the tanks. When they die, they just go back and get some more. We have no sense of how this is affecting populations, but we do know how it affects the individuals. It kills them. So we've got a lot of the world trying to phase out this process, but then there are some parts of the world where they're just getting started. At least 91% of all orcas taken into captivity since 1961 have died. That's quite, let that sink in. And we're not talking about living to ripe old ages and then dying. We're talking about a median survival of 4 years. I want to introduce you to someone. Her name is Kiska. She lives at Marineland, Canada, and this is her tank. And as you can see, her tank is completely barren. She has been alone with no companions for the past 6 years. She had some companions. They didn't get along because, you know, they just throw the whales in together expecting, oh, you're an orca, he's an orca, you'll get along. That doesn't work that way any more than it works for people. She's had 5 children in the tanks, and she's watched all 5 of them die. She doesn't have as much as a ball or hula hoop in her tank. She's all alone. The confinement of tanks is something that, even with the best of intentions, there's no way you can meet the needs of these animals. An orca at SeaWorld would have to swim the circumference of the main pool, and that's the largest tank, more than 1,400 times to match the equivalent daily distance traveled in the wild. It can't be done. You cannot have a tank big enough or interesting enough. The only place is the ocean. So what are the effects of life in the tanks? Well, they're devastating. Absolutely devastating. The chronic stress that life in the tanks causes leads to physiological, anatomical, and psychological conditions. Some of the causes of early death are infectious disease, pneumonia and other lung diseases, brain abscesses, all kinds of infections, Now, these are animals living in a filtered, closed water system, being fed with top veterinarians standing by with all kinds of medications and procedures, and they're still dying. So they're dying from infectious diseases, they're dying from candidiasis, which is a yeast infection. There hasn't been a single reported case of candidiasis in a wild orca, but it's common in the tanks. And they die of gastric ulcers and other stomach diseases. The kinds of behavioral issues that you see are things that are well known in pathological situations. Behavioral stereotypies, repetitive motions, circling round and around and around in the tank. Repetitively bashing the head against the side of the tank. Repetitively making head movements. Regurgitating fish and then swallowing it, and regurgitating and swallowing it. If you see an animal of any kind doing that in a zoo or a marine park, that animal is telling you, help me, they're in trouble. Self-mutilation. What you see here is a photo of Tilikum before he died, of his teeth, or what was left of his teeth, after he spent decades grating his teeth against the concrete walls of the tank and the gates. And most orcas in captivity have teeth like that because they self-mutilate. And they are in very poor muscular condition. You've heard of the drooping dorsal fin. Well, that is a sign that physiologically they are not in condition. There's nowhere to go. Then we have the other kinds of aggression problems and parenting problems. This picture here on the right is an incident that occurred a few years ago where Corky, an individual who was taken from her family in British Columbia when she was about 3, aggressed on Candu and broke Candu's jaw. Blood. This was during a show. The blood spurted out and Candu died right there in front of her child. These are the kinds of things that happen all the time in the tanks. They never happen in a free-ranging population. All the kinds of aggressions that have occurred, orcas killing trainers, so forth. Tilikum killed 3 people. There is not a single documented case of an orca harming a human being in the wild. And people swim with them, kayak with them, boat with them. Not a single case. And yet, when it comes to being in the tanks, they become not only hyper-aggressive, but murderous. And their parenting skills are absent or poor. So let's just for a moment think about that. This is what the life of captive beluga whales, orcas, bottlenose dolphins, porpoises is like for them every single day. And it's worth noting that it's like this for them whether they are born into captivity or taken from the wild. So if they're taken from the wild, they're taken as very young kids away from their family, like Corky or Lolita or Kiska, taken from their family. But those that are born into the tanks still suffer all of those same diseases and chronic stress conditions that I just told you about. So what does that tell you? It tells you that there is a fundamental inability to adapt to concrete tanks. There is a fundamental incompatibility between who dolphins and whales are and the kind of life that they are forced into in marine parks. So, Now I'm going to tell you about our project and how we see this as the solution to this ongoing problem. The solution is sanctuary. So let's think about sanctuary as a general concept. A place where animals or humans can live and be protected for the rest of their lives. And we know there are sanctuaries for all kinds of wild land animals. Chimpanzees, elephants. There's the Paws Sanctuary right here in California. If you've never been there, spectacular. You see elephants from zoos lying on the hillside, sleeping in the sun. Something they weren't allowed to do or had the opportunity to do in a zoo on a concrete slab. Tigers, lions, bears, all kinds of animals. And that's great, and we need more. But there are currently none for dolphins and whales. And that is why we started the Whale Sanctuary Project. Our mission is to establish a permanent seaside sanctuary where captive cetaceans can live in an environment that maximizes well-being and autonomy and is as close as possible to their natural habitat. A place where, for the first time in their lives, they have an opportunity to thrive. Who will our residents be? We're focused on these two species, orcas and beluga whales. Why these two? Well, first of all, the case for poor welfare in concrete tanks is the strongest for these two species. In other words, they do the worst in the concrete tanks. The science has accumulated to the point where there is absolutely no debate about this. They live short, diseased, stressed lives in the concrete tanks, and that's true for orcas, it's true for beluga whales. Of course, it's true for bottlenose dolphins as well, and any of the other cetaceans. But we're focusing on these two. They also have similar environmental and psychological needs. So we are looking to create a sanctuary where we might have some orcas, some belugas, a mixture, or maybe all orcas or all belugas, more cold water. Now, some of you might know that the National Aquarium in Baltimore is undertaking a parallel project for bottlenose dolphins. They currently have 7 bottlenose dolphins, and they are building a sanctuary for bottlenose dolphins in warm water in the Florida Keys. So we're doing cold water, they're doing warm water, and we hope that these are the first of many. So it's really important to think about what an authentic sanctuary is, because a sanctuary is not just take animals, put them in the ocean, put a net across a cove, and you got a sanctuary. Not at all. There's 2 very important things to understand about a sanctuary, a real one. First, it's a place to thrive, okay? Thrive, not just survive for a long time, but actually have a life. And the other layer to that is to model a change in our relationship with the other animals. In other words, it's not just about getting a few beluga whales out of a tank, although that's great and it's wonderful and it needs to be done. It's about saying, okay, we don't have to relate to them as circus performers. We can relate to them as fellow beings who we're trying to give something back to because we've taken so much from them. And model that change that we hope will replace the tanks, the circuses, the zoos, the marine parks. At an authentic sanctuary, the whale's well-being is priority, period. There will be individualized lifetime care, no exploitation, no breeding, no unnecessary invasive procedures. This is a way to say to them, we're not going to intrude upon you and your privacy any more than we have to. Promotion of choice and autonomy, really important, that they be allowed to spend their day the way they want to, and hang out with some fish, or go investigate something that's interesting on the bottom of the floor of the sanctuary. Restoration of as much of a natural life as possible. If you go to a sanctuary and they breed, they're not a sanctuary. So a lot of people ask, why can't we just release them? I mean, after all, don't they have the instinct to survive? Well, the fact is they don't. Captive-born whales do not have the survival skills. They don't have, they've lost that critical period in their childhood where the adults in their group show them, this is a fish. You don't play with a fish, you eat the fish. This is a squid, you eat a squid. This is how to be a proper beluga whale or orca in a social group. This is how you travel. They don't know any of that, and it's very difficult for them to learn that. When they're in concrete tanks, it's impossible. Now, we may have some individuals like Corky or Lolita or Kiska who were born in the wild or a beluga, and we wouldn't hold them back from trying to give them as autonomous a life as possible, and we will take those cases on a case-by-case basis. So all the decisions we make about whether an individual whale goes through certain phases on the road to independence will depend upon best scientific practices, not what we want to see, but what's in their best interest. What we're going to be doing, in addition to giving the best life we can to a few orcas and beluga whales, is conservation through rescue and rehab. Wherever we end up, we are going to be a state-of-the-art rescue and rehab facility. And I just wanted to go back up. On the right, you see this little baby beluga whale, his name is Tylanek, and he's stranded up in Alaska. He is now in SeaWorld, San Antonio, singing for his supper. He's performing, they're teaching him how to perform, he's living in a concrete tank, and that's because there's no alternative. If he can't be released, where does he go? Well, he goes to SeaWorld. And when we build this sanctuary, there will be an alternative. We're also going to do education and public outreach because, again, this is about all of us. This is about saying this is a relationship that we need to have with the animals and the oceans that they live in. We will have a visitor center. That doesn't mean that we're going to become Six Flags over Canada or something. We're going to have an interpretive center that blends in with the environment, allows people to see the animals from afar. We can have all kinds of wonderful educational interactive displays, visitor tours, internship programs for pre-vet. We can also have remote webcam experiences. We can have people from universities, even SeaWorld, hearing and seeing our residents real time without intruding on them at all, and learning what it is like to be an orca or a beluga whale. And how are they doing? How are they adapting? What are they spending their days doing? Not performing, but what they want to do. Now that's exciting. And we're going to have all kinds of community outreach programs. As an educator, I find all of this very, very exciting. So we have been, for the past 2.5 years, looking for sites. And our general criteria are at least 65, 70 to 100 acres. an average of 45 feet deep, over 50% of the water space, an ecologically responsible location where the animals can thrive in a healthy environment and we don't have a negative impact upon the animals and the people who are already there, and strong community partnerships, because we are not going to do this unless the community embraces it. Now, here's where we are. We have been everywhere, and we started out with hundreds of sites, and then we went on foot to both coasts, and we looked at the sites, and we took scientific data and mapping data and so forth, and looked at those that met our criteria. And we have a few priority sites on the East Coast in Nova Scotia and on the West Coast in Washington, as well as British Columbia. So we've whittled this down to about a handful of sites that we are now really getting to know, and getting to know the local people in that community. And hopefully we'll be able to announce some progress in this soon, in the next few months. And this is what it will look like. This is an artist rendering. It's not a photograph, but it contains all of the elements of the sanctuary. It's going to be, this doesn't even show the expanse. We're talking about something 300 times the size of the largest tank in the world right now. We are going to have visitors, and no, they will not be hanging right over the water, even though it looks like that. But they will be up high on interpretive trails, so people can come and they can show their children that's what orcas do, that's what beluga whales do. We're going to have a state-of-the-art veterinary facility for not only our residents, but the rehab and rescue. And we're going to have all kinds of different programs to bring the local community into this project. There's a net, a couple of security nets in the back, and no, orcas, belugas, dolphins, they don't jump over nets. It's something about they don't do nets. And that allows us to keep them securely protected in the sanctuary without worrying about them jumping over and going somewhere and not finding them and so forth. So they will stay in the sanctuary. I mean, those who can go out of the sanctuary, we will make every effort to provide that opportunity for them. But those who cannot will have a real life in a space like this, where the nets will allow fish, other forms of wildlife, all kinds of tides to go in and out. They will actually be in the ocean. So what's happening right now? Well, right now we're in the spring, summer 2018. We are collecting physical oceanography data on 2 or 3 key sites. We are involved with stakeholders, and that's been really important. Everywhere we go, people have embraced this notion. Because, for instance, if we go to Nova Scotia, this will put them on the map. And we have had the pleasure and honor of meeting with people, local fishermen, as well as First Nations communities, just everyone who, they get it, they know that this has to happen. We have a whole lot of regulatory permitting processing going through, but you know, that you have to do and you should have to do. And we're continuing on with that process. We hope that by the winter, we will formalize our site acquisition process and be able to tell you a little bit more about where we're going to be We will do environmental impact statements, continue our community engagement, and start our capital campaign. This site will cost $15 to $20 million in capital cost to build, with a veterinary facility, the whole thing. Which, when you think about it from what places like SeaWorld, you know, they spend on things, it's nothing. And in 2019, we are going to initiate a formal permitting process, have the site designed, and continue our community engagement and ongoing fundraising. And we plan for our first residents in 2020. Thank you. This is a very aggressive timeline. But we have to be. We have to be because the momentum is with us now. And these animals have been waiting long enough in these tanks. We don't know who's going to be alive in 2020 to become a candidate to go into the sanctuary, or who's going to be released. But we know that there are so many that whoever ends up in the sanctuary is going to thrive. And everyone, you know, is rooting for a different beluga whale or orca whale. And if we could, we would take all of them. We can't. But what we can do is show people this is doable. This is proof of concept. We can do this with 10 animals. You can do it with 10 more. You can do it with 20, and so on and so forth. And it is that way that we provide a new cultural space, an alternative to seeing these animals in the concrete tanks. So that's what I want to tell you. I really appreciate your time. Please visit us. We have a table out there with a bunch of cute little orcas that you can put them on a pen or a pencil or whatever. And, but please come visit us. We're on Facebook and Twitter. Learn more about us. We're here. I personally answer all of the comments on Facebook and appreciate everyone's engagement and enthusiasm about this. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
You want to stay for some questions?
Sure.
It's okay. If anybody wants to make any question, we have time for some questions, maybe 2, 3.
Where are these animals coming from? Who's giving them to you?
Nobody is going, well, the question is, where are the animals coming from? Who's giving them to us? Nobody's giving us away. But what we are doing, that's a really legitimate question, because we need to build this, but we also need to find a way to get these animals out of the concrete tanks. And there's several things going on. Ever since Blackfish, the public has really turned against marine parks. SeaWorld is really hurting right now, and there's several other parks, Marineland, Canada. They have 50 beluga whales stuffed into 2 tanks. Nobody likes this. And so the public is doing the job of sending the message, we don't want to buy tickets anymore to see these spectacles. We have maintained that we are not here to shut SeaWorld down. And we're not. We're here to say to SeaWorld, you're in trouble. Here's a way out. Here's an alternative. If you want to do this in good faith, we'll do it with you. This is not about us, not about SeaWorld or any of the other places. It's about the animals. And so we have continually taken that stance. We continue to, and we will sit down with anybody at SeaWorld who wants to talk, or any of these other facilities. The other thing is there are facilities in Europe and in Asia who are trying to give away some of their beluga whales and orcas because they know what's happening. And then there's Marineland Canada, which is run by someone who it may not be around for very long, and we don't know what's going to happen to them. We're keeping our eye on everything. At the same time, we are working to promote legislation and policy that would outlaw keeping these animals and breeding these animals in the concrete tanks. It has to be phased out. So we're really big proponents of the Canadian Bill S-203, which is in its third reading now, and if it passes, it will outlaw keeping dolphins and whales in Canadian marine parks forever, and breeding. So it's a tough nut, but eventually we will find the solution.
Hi, I was just curious because I know he's into this. Do you have the support or work with Steve-O from? He was in What the Help, right? From the Jackass series. Yeah, Steve-O. Do you know Steve-O?
No, no. Tell me about it.
Well, I don't know too much about him, but he's a huge activist against SeaWorld. I'm pretty sure he does want to shut SeaWorld down completely.
We welcome, if you know this individual and he wants to contact us, we welcome that. We really are also reaching out to people in the entertainment business and so forth. I mean, we've got over 50 scientists and engineers and activists, and we really, we know that there are people in the entertainment business who really are moved by this situation and want to help, and we'll talk to everyone who wants to do the right thing.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. I'm sorry, I can't hear you. Can someone, or?
She was waiting for the, wait a minute here.
Thank you. So on SeaWorld's website, they state that they are investing in some sort of whale conservation project. And I was just wondering, how much truth is in that, if you know?
Yeah, I do know. So, SeaWorld and other places like that are basically entertainment parks, right? Let's say what it is. And they have said for years now that they do conservation and education. Well, I've done research on this. There's no education and no data to support that. They do some conservation. It just doesn't happen to be a whole lot in the cetacean area. So I'm not saying SeaWorld doesn't do good things. They do. But one of the things they do is not good, and that is keeping dolphins and whales performing in concrete tanks. So yeah, they do some conservation. They should stick to that and do more of that and let go of the old-fashioned idea that people want to come and see these animals performing. What I call a one-way ticket to show business, They rescue an animal, and before you know it, the animal's performing. Instead of letting that individual just live the best life he or she can, they recruit them, force them into this entertainment model, and that's something that we can't do anything about until there are sanctuaries.
Well, this kind of goes along with that. I wasn't aware of them saying that they were being involved in a whale sanctuary, but what about the approach of approaching different organizations like SeaWorld and other research and entertainment to encourage them to want to be the people who invest in creating more than just 2 or 3 of these locations? And to me, it's kind of like, why wouldn't the oil industry want to be the investors in the solar? I mean, go with the flow. So that model didn't work or isn't working as well anymore. So let's do the new thing. Are y'all coming to the table with people as a business model almost to do that are already in these industries that aren't so awesome as we perceive them now.
Yes, SeaWorld and these other places know that we want to come to the table with them. If SeaWorld tomorrow said, hey, we're building an authentic sanctuary off the coast of Washington and we're bringing all the orcas that we hold there, and we're going to call it the SeaWorld is the king of the world sanctuary, we're wonderful, fine. This is not about people. This is about the whales. And if they want to do that, either in collaboration with us or on their own, and something we're doing here pushes them in that space, great. We have not seen them be sensitive to that. They're really dug in. And, you know, I mean, they've got to admit that they had it wrong for so many years. And they still are doing wrong by keeping these animals in these concrete tanks. That's tough for people to admit, right? You know, and so we are hoping that maybe the next person who takes over from the last CEO will be progressive and understand that this is the future for the whales, but also for SeaWorld. That they could be the heroes in this if they want. Great. So I hear you, and again, we have our hands outstretched to them every single day.
Okay, I'll be exhausted. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Okay, I don't know if you're gonna be around for people to ask you.
I'll be in the back at the table, I'll be around, and
Awesome. There are many ways to support the project, so let's spread the good news and help. So we're gonna have a break now. Thank you so much, Larry.